SUPERHYPERCUBE, which was made by my collective that I'm a member of, Kokoromi. And those are some ways you can get in touch if you want to talk. So in my day job, I guess you could say, I'm an assistant professor at Carnegie Mellon University in their Entertainment Technology Center. And my background, how I got to do that, is that I'm a video game designer. I've been working in the, what you would call AAA industry, sort of big budget games for about 19 years. And just by way of example, this is one called Splinter Cell. It's a Tom Clancy sort of spy game, and I worked on that in 2005. And but on the sort of sidetrack, I'm also a curator of games and game-like experiences and making more experimental types of games, and as a researcher. And this piece here is at an exhibition in Paris in 2012 called Joue le jeu, which means kind of play along with me. And it's a piece by Hide and Seek, a sadly now defunct London-based game operation. It's called The Building Is, and it was a piece that infused the entire building in downtown Paris with this game where you interacted with the different senses of the building, and then it would express how it reacted to you through its emotions. And what you see here when you entered the building was a display of what its current emotional state was, and it's looking a little turbulent there. And some work, personal work of mine. This is a hopscotch, a kind of pas de deux, a hopscotch for two. Called Trente pas entre terre et ciel. And it's meant to be played by multiple pairs of people going along one after the other, so it could have multiple teams playing on it at the same time. It's like 19 meters long. And you'd have to do things like hold hands with the other player, or give encouragement to other people that were on the hopscotch, or race against each other, or cross paths without touching. And that was entirely conveyed through the symbols of the hopscotch itself. So a completely non-digital piece, except that it was made, of course, on a computer. But what I want to talk to you about today is the piece that you can see right now out in the exhibition, which was made by my collective Kokoromi, as I'd mentioned. We've been around now for 10 years. It's kind of amazing. We started in 2006. We met in Montreal, and there's 4 of us: Damien, Cindy, me, and Phil. And just by way of example of the kind of things we were doing when we first got started, these are some images from one of our events called Gamma, and this one in particular was Gamma 256. This was in 2007, and what we did was we were interested in sort of getting experimental games made and then bringing those to a public. So we invited people, game creators, to make a game that would fit into a small aspect ratio. It had to be less than 256 pixels in any direction, but we curated for the ones that were even more extreme. So the smallest one in the exhibit was 8 by 8 pixels. So on the display, they were all in projection, and like every pixel was about this big. And it was totally playable. It was amazing. And that event was actually known somewhat well for being the debut of Jason Rohr's Passage, which, if you know, is a kind of memento mori game that occurs in a kind of strip format across the screen and is now in the collection of the MoMA and other places. But after this particular event, the Gamma 256, we were thinking about what we might want to do next, and we don't have a set format of like yearly events or anything like that, but when something inspires us, we kind of want to grab onto it and see what we can do with it. And if you'll remember, the year right after that was the year of the 3D television. Does anybody remember these things? Completely ridiculous. Yeah, they were of course all the hype because we were supposed to go out and buy new TVs and the glasses that would go with them that would let you see this, so that like the monster or Spider-Man would jump off the screen and into your living room, and so you had to go get these. And we were understandably quite skeptical of this, but wanted to, and they were also being pitched a lot to game developers as something that, oh, start making games for this new format, these 3D TVs. And I guess it should be emphasize that it's talking about stereoscopic. So there's a lot of games that are made with three-dimensional graphics, but these are talking about ones where you actually see two images with your two eyes. So we weren't buying it, but we were actually kind of curious, does it matter at all? Is there something you can do with stereoscopic vision that would mean something in the game? So we decided to make an event about that and called it Gamma 3D. And so in 2008, we proposed that people contribute some kind of game that would use stereoscopic vision, but we decided to go very lo-fi and went with anaglyphic stereoscopy, which is the red cyan, the type that you have when you're in a movie theater in the 50s. So you see us all wearing those glasses here. That's one eye red and one eye cyan. And we wanted to find out if it could be more than just eye candy to have this stereoscopic sight. And we also started working on our own game for that, and this is the very kind of seed crux of SUPERHYPERCUBE. It was based on that game. You might see a TV game show called Hole in the Wall, or it's sometimes called Human Tetris, depending on which country it's being shown in. And the idea is that there is a shape in the foreground. Usually in the TV game show, it's yourself, and you're making like a shape, and there's a wall coming towards you, and you have to move in the right position so that you don't get knocked over by the wall and fall into the water. But in our case, it was a bunch of cubes, and the cube cluster was going to be growing as you went along. So, but what we did to actually, in our estimation, that wasn't actually going to work very well if you only have the stereoscopic vision. What else would it need? It would actually need to have head tracking. So while we were developing the game itself, we were also playing around with this DIY head tracking solution that had come out on YouTube that year from a researcher named Johnny Lee, who was at the time at the Carnegie Mellon's Human-Computer Interaction Institute. And he was just making things with readily available hardware technologies that you could get, like consumer stuff, and putting it together to make things possible that really hadn't been very accessible before. And so you see here in these stills from his video, he's putting on the glasses, and the glasses actually have the infrared lights on the side, and then the Nintendo Wiimote is pointing from the TV at you, and so you can use that to kind of get this head tracking effect. So we decided to put those two things together, the head tracking and the stereoscopic vision, and that's what you have here. It's a pair of 3D glasses with the infrared tracking soldered and hot glued onto the sides of it. It was very fragile system. Sometimes it had to be reconstituted every time we were doing another showing of it, but it worked great. It gives you a real kind of magic window effect onto the game world, which at this point was still on some kind of screen or in a projection, but you really felt like where you were, where your head was, and what was in front of you mattered. So you'd have to, and I'm going to go away from the microphone here, but you had to lean like this or like that to actually be able to see what was going on in the game world. So we felt that with the addition of this head tracking, we were able to kind of solve that particular question. So the real answer is the stereoscopic vision doesn't do too much on its own, but when you add that element of where is your head located in space, surprisingly, it starts to mean something. So yeah, we showed this around at a number of different festivals at the time, and it might have just sort of gone to rest there, but a few years later, you may recall this happening. The Kickstarter for the Oculus Rift came along, and everybody was starting to then think about, wow, actually we have all the parts in place to be able to make something that people could actually have in their homes and use. And that also started us thinking, because we really liked the game and a lot of people had wondered how they would ever get to play it. And it occurred to us that, well, we should go for it, because essentially it's using exactly the same controls that we've used all along. We designed it specifically for this system, for this stereoscopic vision, for the head tracking, and for a handheld controller. So why not? Let's just go for it. But we had to kind of rethink a lot of not the design of the game per se, but a lot of the visuals, because with the anaglyphic stereoscopy, you have the color palette limitations, and you're relying on color to separate those channels. And now we could go full color. So of course, this is where we went naturally. We're of course incredibly inspired by a lot of the visions, the science fiction, the science fantasy of things like 2001, or the targeting computer in Star Wars, the vector graphics style, and sort of also the kind of analog graphics styles of those. And we also have some inspiration from the kind of dream of computers and what they're going to bring us, not just the way that things look, but the evocation of this sense of wonder and of hope. But at the same time, we have a lot of neon in our game, and it's kind of a cyberpunk commentary, I guess, or reference, because there's that whole strand of science fiction that's more dystopian, but also looking at like, what does it mean to be human? And these kind of analog elements really kind of recall that for us. And we're supposed to like leave behind the physical world, and we're merging with our machines, and you see that in things like Tron. And of course, the other aspect of this is that it's really nostalgic for us. We have a lot of childhood associations with this. And a friend, who I think is in the audience, recently told me that when he played a VR game for the first time, he got this sense of sort of like what it was like when he played like maybe NES or one of those console games for the first time, and this like world opened up to him. And the VR is sort of trying to do the same thing now. One reference that I can never resist bringing, but that is rather unusual for people if they didn't grow up a teenage girl in the 70s or something, is this is some screens from Xanadu, the musical with Electric Light Orchestra and Olivia Newton-John. And to me, the neon also recalls this. It's more of a magical, feminine, and actually the scene here on the bottom is like the scene of heaven where the gods live. And I really think it's important to kind of also reintegrate this aspect of the technology imaginary, not just the Tron, but also the Xanadu. So that's sort of like all from around the 80s era of this fascination with and imagination of what these virtual worlds might be like. And then we jump ahead another 10 years and we get to references that are actually the first, I guess it would be close to the first wave of virtual reality that was being made and explored. You might recognize Jaron Lanier's what's called the Virtual Interface Environment Workstation there on the left. I think it's actually interesting, the comparison with these two images, the real and the virtual, because the way that the woman is positioned, it makes you think perhaps she's actually with the lawnmower man, and so maybe that's what she's experiencing there. NASA brought that to her. But that was more as we got toward the 90s and it became more real. It also became a bit more. We started to see the pessimistic view of what virtual reality might be, where it overtakes us and we go crazy and we can't resist it. So the tension there is really quite interesting and fruitful for us. I think that the other thing I would really love to remember from the 90s, if there's anything I want to emulate from the 90s, it's the work of Shar Davies. I don't know if any of you all know her. Please tell her that we miss her. And this piece, the Osmos, which uses an actual kind of lung, it uses a sort of vest, and so when you breathe in, you rise up, and when you breathe out, you descend in the world, and it's quite beautiful and ethereal. And it actually, it's virtual reality, but in a way it puts you more in touch with your physical body, and it doesn't take you away from it, it puts you into it. Our other influences are actually more outside of the world of virtual reality and more in the world of art. We're very influenced by light and space artists, artists that are working with perceptual phenomena and neon light, things like Dan Flavin, Olafur Eliasson, and we are bringing those influences directly into the work itself. Here's some early concept drawings or concept illustrations of SUPERHYPERCUBE, where you can see it's essentially a very minimalist puzzle game, but in these very enveloping worlds. And this one, I think, might actually literally be a James Turrell piece that we used as a kind of concept for our own idea of what we would like the game to feel like. So we started from there and then went to developing it for the virtual reality system. And so you see here just a few of the early prototypes from our development process, which we've been at about 1.5 years now, maybe almost 2 years. And then the version that you have out there, oh, it's flashing, I hope it's okay for everybody, but the version that we have out in the lobby right now is the one that's going to be released first. It's for the PlayStation virtual reality system that comes out in October. So you'll be able to see some of these influences that I've mentioned here. And we don't really know which of these VR futures that we're heading towards as a culture. It's probably all of them. But in as much as kokoromi have any say in the matter, we know which of these versions we want to be facing toward, and we hope you'll come along with us. Thanks.